This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. Despite pushback from Republicans in his party, Speaker Mike Johnson this evening puts a bill on the House floor to fund the government through January. A similar bipartisan deal was the last straw that led to former Speaker Kevin McCarthy losing the gavel. But Johnson today saying the current bill is a step in the right direction that accepts the reality of working with a divided Congress. NTD's Melina Weisskopf joins us now from Capitol Hill. Melina, first tell us, how did the vote tally?
Yeah, Tiff, that vote just wrapped up just moments ago, and it sailed through the House easily with an overwhelming majority of lawmakers supporting it. The total was 336 to 95. But the interesting thing, Tiff, about this vote is that more Democrats supported it than Republicans. There were 209 Democrats who supported it. Compare that with only 127 Republicans who supported it. There were 93 Republicans who opposed it. We did know that there would be a significant number of Republicans to oppose this, especially after the House Freedom Caucus, which represents around 3 dozen Republican lawmakers, put out a statement opposing it. I'll read you exactly what they said earlier today about that. They said they're opposed because it contains no spending reductions, no border security, and not a single meaningful win for the American people. And while we remain committed to working with Speaker Johnson, we need bold change. I do want to point out that last sentence, though, because it does reflect a different reality for Speaker Johnson than we saw of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, because it does show that even though Republicans, a lot of them, oppose this continuing resolution, he still has the trust of the caucus. And despite the fact that an overwhelming amount of Republicans did oppose this continuing resolution, Johnson did try to paint this as a win. It is different than past continuing resolutions. It's a laddered approach, which essentially means it's divided into 2 parts. One part expires January, one part expires in February, and it also allows them to avoid having to pass a spending bill at the end of the year. Now, an interesting thing about Johnson, though, is that in the past he always opposed continuing resolutions, even the one they recently passed back before former Speaker Kevin McCarthy was ousted. I asked him how he feels about having to now go against his conscience and having to put something on the floor that he has long opposed in principle. Here's how he responded to that.
Well, look, getting us beyond the shutdown and making sure that government stays in operation is a matter of conscience for all of us. Look, it took decades to get into this mess, right? I've been at the job less than 3 weeks, right? I can't turn an aircraft carrier overnight.
So there's Johnson, of course, just reflecting that reality that he does have to work within a slim majority in the House. He does have to work with a Democrat-controlled Senate and President Biden, of course, a Democrat in the White House. Tiff.
And Melina, how is the Senate responding to Speaker Johnson's approach? Will the bill move forward after clearing the House?
We expect it to easily sail forward in the Senate because Senate Leader Chuck Schumer has expressed openness to it. He says that he's pleased, actually, with the GOP-led bill because it doesn't contain any so-called poison pills. It doesn't contain any spending cuts. So we do expect it to easily pass through the Senate later this week. As for how the White House will handle it, the White House has been critical of it, but they've stopped short of saying that President Biden would veto it. When Biden was asked directly about whether or not he'd whether or not he would veto it, he refrained from answering that question directly. So we do expect to see some Democrat consensus in the Senate and in the White House around this bill. Tiff.
Melina, thank you for that update. Over to California, repairs are underway for the Los Angeles Freeway destroyed in a massive fire. Governor Gavin Newsom said the I-10 will no longer need to be demolished or replaced.
Again, 100 columns have been damaged, 9 or 10 severely. But that shoring work will continue 24/7, and it will allow us to reopen for traffic the I-10 in a matter of weeks. The estimate currently is 3 to 5 weeks. There was malice intent that this fire occurred within the fence line of the facility you see behind me, that it was arson, and that it was done and set intentionally.
While officials believe the pallet fire was set intentionally, there's still no immediate information on a suspect. The fire is still under investigation. People can visit fixthei10.ca.gov to track the progress of the road's construction. As President Biden is set to meet with Chinese dictator Xi Jinping in San Francisco, victims of Beijing's human rights abuses are condemning the regime. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more from the APEC summit in San Francisco.
As President Biden landed here in San Francisco for the APEC summit, protests are ongoing against the head of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping. Earlier on Tuesday, we were outside of the hotel where Xi is reportedly staying with the Chinese delegation, which is right across from here, the summit venue. And we saw this group of anti-CCP protesters who say they're victims of the Chinese Communist Party's human rights persecution in China. And the scene of clashing happens as they confronted a group of pro-CCP people who were reportedly hired by the New York Chinese consulate to come all the way to here to San Francisco to show support for the Chinese communist regime. Let's take a look at the scene and hear what the anti-CCP people had to tell us. Watch.
So we're right now right outside the hotel where the Chinese delegation is staying here in San Francisco for the APEC summit, and we're seeing a huge group of both pro-CCP and anti-CCP protesters clashing right here, with the anti-CCP group yelling that the CCP has been killing people and harming their property and lives, while the other group also waving the Chinese Communist Party flags.
他们是一群骗子，粉饰太平，来欺骗全世界人民，假的，假的。
现在的土匪在政府，把我们这些平民百姓的财产都抢为弄为他们自己所有，所以我们百姓在国内的这片土地上真的生不如死。
Sources told the Epoch Times that a Chinese consulate in New York hired Chinese locals to come all the way to San Francisco by providing them with free food, free hotel, and free flights. And critics say that it's a manifestation of the Chinese Communist Party's exploitation of freedoms here enjoyed on U.S. soil to promote communist ideas. And of course, for the next 2 days, more protests are planned, especially on Wednesday, which is when President Biden is set to meet with Xi. And now the pressure is mounting for President Biden to emphasize human rights issues with the Chinese dictator. Reporting in San Francisco, Iris Tao, NTD News.
NTD's Steve Lance traveled to South Korea and uncovered how the Chinese Communist Party is attempting to block a U.S.-based arts company from performing there. Tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll be airing a special report called Canceled Arts. Tune in on NTD.com or APECTV.com as we delve into the details of the CCP's infiltration. With APEC in San Francisco, downtown is looking much cleaner and safer. It's what some residents have been pushing leaders to make happen for some time. NTD's Jason Blair brings us more.
Most of APEC's events are happening downtown San Francisco in the Soma neighborhood, one of the city's hotspots for homelessness and drug use. A lot of residents and visitors have noticed that much of it has been cleared out.
The city has shown the people that we can actually have clean streets, that we can actually make progress.
Ortega is actively involved locally and has been urging the San Francisco Board of Supervisors to make changes.
And supervisors, the day you all support treatment instead of drug dens is when we can properly address mental illness, especially when it comes to drug addiction.
Ortega is also glad to see more people coming into the city.
We need people to come in San Francisco. We lost so many people because of the expensiveness, because of the homeless population, because of the crime. So it's good to have at least more foot traffic in the city to show off, some good spaces, even though it's only a limited amount.
California Governor Gavin Newsom commented on the changes in San Francisco with APEC in town.
Anytime you put on an event, by definition, you have people over your house, you're going to clean up the house.
Newsom also said that he thinks San Francisco and the state as a whole has been making positive progress with new task forces and multi-departmental cooperation.
All of these are component parts of addressing the issues that I hear more often than any other issues, and it's just quality of life and the need to partner with new vigor and intentionality. And I just think we're at a different place now than we've ever been.
San Francisco resident J.J. Smith, who often helps homeless people and individuals struggling with addiction, said that many of the people on the streets downtown have spread out into other areas. Tuesday is when many heads of state are expected to arrive for APEC, including Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Biden. The trade summit runs until Friday. Reporting in San Francisco, Jason Blair, NTD News.
And now for updates on the Israel-Hamas war, more people in Gaza are fleeing from the main hospital in the north as the U.S. says Hamas terrorists are using it to hide. Just a warning, the following footage may be disturbing for some viewers due to its graphic nature.
Thousands are fleeing the Al-Shifa hospital as fighting continues in the Gaza Strip. Al-Shifa is the biggest hospital of the territory and the only one still operating in the northern part of Gaza. The Israeli military says Hamas terrorists have been hiding in and beneath the hospital and using it to hold hostages. The Biden administration on Tuesday confirmed Israel's claim.
We do have information that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad uses some hospitals in the Gaza Strip, including the Al-Shifa hospital, as a way to conceal and support their military operations and hold hostages. They have tunnels underneath these hospitals.
Israeli troops have besieged the hospital, and intense fighting with Hamas has been taking place near it. The United Nations says 200,000 people have fled from northern to southern Gaza in the past 10 days. In a nationally televised press conference Tuesday, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant commented on the progress with the ground operation in Gaza.
In the north of the Gaza Strip, Hamas has lost control, and in fact, we control the entire upper and central range of the Gaza Strip, in the north of the Gaza Strip, and especially in Gaza City.
The Israeli military says it has seized a series of Hamas government buildings in central Gaza City. That includes the Hamas parliament, Hamas police headquarters, and a compound housing Hamas military intelligence headquarters. To show the extent that Hamas is using civilian structures to hide, Israeli forces posted photos of a Hamas tunnel shaft they found in a mosque. The defense minister said the campaign against Hamas will take many months to complete. And regarding the hostage situation, both sides said a 19-year-old Israeli soldier who was captured in the October 7th attack has died in captivity. She is the first hostage confirmed to have died. Hamas released a video late Monday showing Noa Marciano identifying herself, then showed images of what appeared to be her dead body. Families of hostages have begun a protest march on Tuesday from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, demanding that the Israeli government do more to secure the release of the hostages.
My niece is 3 years old, my nephew is 8 years old, and my cousin is 12-year-old. My mother was taken, my sister's husband, and my aunt. They were all taken 39 days ago. They don't have any more time.
Participants on Tuesday started off with a minute of silence in Marciano's memory. The 40-mile march will take 5 days and reach Prime Minister Netanyahu's office. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
A sea of Israeli and U.S. flags flying over the National Mall. Tens of thousands from around the country gathering for what appears to be the largest pro-Israel rally in the U.S. since the Hamas terror attack last month. NTD's Sam Wong brings us more.
At the nation's capital today, tens of thousands are gathering for the March for Israel rally, and many of them actually traveled across the country just for this historical occasion. And of course, they're here to condemn the rise of anti-Semitism here in the U.S., while also voicing solidarity for hostages held in captivities by Hamas terrorists. All right, let's turn to the crowd and see how they feel today. All right, guys, what's your name?
I'm Isabel.
Okay, and how do we feel today? What is your reaction to this historical event?
I think it's really important to be here. We all flew in just for the day to, at the same time, show our support for Israel, but also oppose all the anti-Semitic acts we've been seeing happening on college campuses and around the world.
Our Jewish students are going to stand up no matter what. We're going to be marching on our campuses, educating on our campuses, to be able to counter what is going on our campuses. But it's beautiful to see that all of these people are here for one purpose, and that purpose is Israel.
When there is a problem in Israel, everybody gets together, and the same in America, Democrat, Republican, one, it doesn't matter because they want Israel to live.
Throngs of demonstrators, many draped in Israeli flags, filled the National Mall all the way to the Washington Monument. Organizers believe there are more than 200,000 people in attendance, well exceeding expectations. In the midst of Israel's war with Hamas terrorists, protesters are demanding the immediate release of the hostages still held in the Gaza Strip. Some of the hostages' family members, as well as some U.S. lawmakers, are also in attendance to address the crowd.
We hostage families have lived the last 39 days in slow motion torment.
History shows that when the world ignored anti-Semitism in the last century, it led to the worst catastrophe in human history.
Israel will cease their counteroffensive when Hamas ceases to be a threat to the Jewish state.
And the security is tight in the surrounding areas. Road closures have been in place since this morning. Law enforcement, accompanied by the National Guard, were present at every street corner. The Department of Homeland Security classified the march as a Level 1 security event, the highest risk assessment level in the system. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Sam Wong, NTD News.
Members of the Biden administration on Tuesday going against the president. More than 400 staffers and political appointees from 40 government agencies sent a letter to Biden. They criticize his support for Israel and demand he call for a ceasefire. This comes as the divide regarding the Israel-Hamas war grows within the Democratic Party. The Biden administration has repeatedly made its stance clear since the attacks.
Israel has a right and responsibility to defend itself, and we're going to make sure they have the tools and capabilities to do that. We ought not forget what happened 1 month ago. 1,400 people slaughtered in their homes.
Meanwhile, more and more fellow Democrats are now going against that policy, such as Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Monday night.
We will demand more of our president. Yes. Right. We will demand better of our president. Yes. Ceasefire is not just an option. It is our only way out of this. Yes.
Officials previously pointed out that a ceasefire would only help Hamas, since Israel is the only party in the conflict adhering to such agreements. Now, what's interesting to note is that a lot of the signatories are people in their 20s and 30s, indicating a strong generational divide when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war, with a lot of young people supporting Palestine and some even Hamas. And just on Monday, members of the State Department also criticized Biden for supporting Israel. 100 State Department employees signed a memo alleging Israel committed war crimes and/or crimes against humanity under international law. Yet we have failed to reassess our posture towards Israel. Blinken responded to the State Department memo, saying their concerns are being heard. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
Welcome back. Former President Trump's appeal has disappeared from a court calendar. The appeal was scheduled Monday in the civil fraud case filed by Attorney General Letitia James, but for some unknown reason, his case wasn't on the list. The appeal is over Judge Arthur Engoron's ruling that he and others fraudulently inflated his assets. They say the judge didn't have all of the facts. We turn now to our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards, to find out more. Arlene, before we get to the legal arguments in this appeal, what has the defense team been saying to the judge about his decision, and what has been his response?
Well, the defense has repeatedly complained that different times during the trial, the judge didn't give them an opportunity to present their defense, and that he only relied on what the Attorney General presented in making his ruling that fraud indeed occurred. Now, the judge has said they basically missed the opportunity to raise their defenses, and that it's too late to do that now.
And we know that the Attorney General filed a complaint alleging that Donald Trump and others were involved in a scheme to defraud banks and insurance companies. But how is it that the judge was able to make a final ruling on that claim before the trial even started?
Well, that's a very good question, Tiffany. And there are a lot of people who are wondering that same thing. And I had to do a little research and review the motion filed by the Attorney General that triggered this decision. And what I found out was she filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, which basically says we know we will likely win this case because we have an abundance of evidence that proves fraud. So before the trial even begins, we want to make sure that the defendants don't try to hide the money so that we can't get to it. Now, we are asking for millions of dollars in restitution, so we want you to prevent Trump from transferring assets to any non-party or otherwise disposing of any assets before the trial is complete. And in addition, we want you to assign a monitor to keep an eye on his assets to make sure he doesn't make those kinds of moves. And at that time, the defense responded that this is a politically motivated prosecution. And the Attorney General's evidence doesn't conclusively prove fraud because she is cherry-picking excerpts from documents and deposition testimony. So they're saying, without even knowing all the facts, she's trying to say, I've proven my case. But they say she doesn't know how to apply basic accounting principles. And besides that, there is no real harm done here. As they've stated many times during the trial, there's no victim here. They say the banks are happy, everyone's loan was paid back on time, and they made millions of dollars from it. So as far as the defense was concerned when she filed that motion, there was no case here.
But the judge actually ruled Trump was fraudulent, plus he assigned a monitor in order that his business certificates be canceled. What did the defense argue in their appeal?
Well, it appears that the judge may have turned this motion for preliminary injunction into a summary judgment motion, which that allows him to decide the case as a matter of law. And what that means is that based on the law and the facts, he can make a determination that fraud occurred just by himself. And of course, this case doesn't have a jury anyway, but even if it was going to be a jury trial, he can still make that determination before the trial begins. So the defense in their papers on appeal, they're arguing that the judge didn't hear all of the evidence, although he apparently stated in open court that he did hear all the evidence. But in addition to that, he went above and beyond what the Attorney General had actually asked for. So he ordered the cancellation of business certificates, and he put in motion for the proceedings to dissolve several businesses that are not even parties in the lawsuit. And so the defense is saying this will cause irreparable harm to multiple businesses, as well as threaten the employment of thousands of individuals. They say this is unprecedented for a judge to make such a sprawling decision without due process. And in addition, they say it's not what the Attorney General asked for in her motion. Now, I will note that the Attorney General did ask in her complaint that the business certificates be canceled, but she also asked for certain other safeguards that would block Trump and the other defendants from doing business for about 5 years. But I'm not sure that she asked that the businesses be completely dissolved.
Arlene, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Tiffany. Thank you.
Paul Pelosi delivers his testimony in court. His attacker allegedly planned to detain former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and ended up hitting her husband with a hammer last year. Let's check in with NTD's David Lamb.
Paul Pelosi, husband of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, took to the stand for the first time on November 13th in his hammer attack trial. Mr. Pelosi said he was shocked to see a man standing in his bedroom on the night of the attack. The 83-year-old said, "Looking at him and looking at the hammer and the ties, I recognized that I was in serious danger, so I tried to stay as calm as possible." According to prosecutors, suspect David DePape broke into Pelosi's San Francisco home in the early hours of October 2022 and looking for Nancy Pelosi. DePape had claimed that people's individual liberties were being threatened. FBI documents indicate that DePape said Speaker Pelosi was the, quote, leader of the pack. Pelosi said he managed to call the police in the restroom and then convinced the suspect to go downstairs, believing it'd be easier for cops to arrest him. But DePape's former girlfriend tells the APEC Times,
his story really falls apart because it's very hard to understand how he managed to sleep through all that noise. It was, supposedly breaking in and stuff. How he was holding a drink at the end while he was supposedly being attacked and he's still holding a drink.
DePape pleaded not guilty to attempted murder, kidnapping, assault on an official's family member, and other felonies. Closing arguments in the trial are scheduled for Wednesday. DePape could face life in prison if found guilty. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
A new consumer price index report was released today. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says inflation came in a bit cooler than in the previous month. For more, we spoke with NTD Business host Don Ma. Don Ma, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here, Tiffany.
To begin, how do the numbers look?
Well, let me just give you a quick overview of some of the more important numbers. There are a few of them here. To start off, month over month, it was a little changed in October. So that number came in at 0.4% in October. And now, let's talk about the headline number, which is the one that a lot of media headlines are picking up. Headline number came in a little bit cooler compared to last month. The year-over-year number at 3.2%, down from 3.7% from September. So that's a bit of welcome news for a lot of people here. And another number here is the core CPI, Core Consumer Price Index, excludes food and energy, which the Federal Reserve considers volatile. And that number came in at 4.0%. That's also a bit lower compared to the previous month. And what contributed to this CPI report this month, the lower numbers actually, was gasoline prices. And we all know gasoline prices goes into CPI. So it's no surprise here that we're getting a bit of a cooler headline number here in October's report.
And Don, what is the sentiment surrounding this new number?
So when inflation comes in cooler, of course, a lot of people are happy about that because it reinforces the idea that perhaps the Fed is done hiking interest rates because the Fed wants inflation to come down to 2%, and with lower inflation coming in October, that gives people more confidence that perhaps the Fed could be ending its hiking cycle this time around. But it remains to be seen. The Federal Reserve, of course, won't admit that it's done. It's said previously that another hike is potentially on the table, but investors, economists, and other analysts are welcoming this new CPI report from October because of the cooler headline number.
And Don, you mentioned how the CPI report doesn't include things like groceries, but how does this inflation number impact average Americans who are maybe still feeling those high prices?
Right, so yeah, you're right. The core CPI exclude food and energy prices because the Federal Reserve considers them volatile, especially energy prices, because if Saudi Arabia, let's say, decides to cut oil production, there's nothing really the Fed can do. So it excludes those prices. But as for what consumers are feeling in terms of inflation, even though it has cooled a bit compared to the previous month, and it has cooled significantly compared to the peak at 9.1%. But, you know, despite this, I don't think consumers are seeing cheaper prices per se, because what inflation is it's a measure of how fast prices are growing. So we're not actually seeing prices go down, even though inflation is slowing. What it actually really means is that prices are still increasing, but at a slower pace. Now, if you're paying for $4 a gallon for gasoline this year, and next year you still pay $4 a gallon, that's 0% inflation, but it doesn't mean prices are coming down.
Fascinating. Well, Don Ma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany.
A wave of anti-Semitism has been sweeping college campuses. Students and professors are openly expressing support for the Hamas terrorist group. NTD's Jack Bradley has more.
Anti-Semitism is surging across college campuses.
Students are being assaulted. Students are being threatened. There's vandalism. There's harassment of all sorts, not just on a few hotspot campuses, but all over this country.
During a congressional hearing Tuesday, human rights activist Kenneth Marcus said hatred toward Jewish people has skyrocketed tenfold since the October 7th massacre, in which Hamas terrorists murdered about 1,200 Jewish civilians. Sahar Kartak, a Jewish student at Yale University, says a growing number of students at Yale support Hamas. She told lawmakers about a pro-Gaza event at the school.
Panelists refused to label Hamas, quote, terrorists, let alone to condemn them when asked. They instead justified their brutalities, saying, quote, Violent resistance movements often emerge in colonized spaces.
Tartak said many students hold pro-Hamas events at Yale, where hundreds of them yell, "Resistance is justified." Many of her fellow Jewish students are afraid of talking to professors because she said those professors openly support Hamas. Tartak said one of her Jewish friends went to a dance concert where people were collecting donations for Hamas.
On campus, I sit in a crowded dining hall and I ask myself, how many people in this room want me dead?
Witnesses told lawmakers a lot of the anti-Semitism is because of what some consider leftist ideologies.
EI programs are built on an ideology which creates a dichotomy between oppressor and oppressed, between white supremacist and BIPOC, and too often Jews are viewed as being ultra-white oppressors.
Marcus said the entire ideology is often structured against Jewish people, and this leads to anti-Semitism. Rabbi Moshe Hauer says ignorance also contributes to the current wave of anti-Semitism. People simply don't know the details of what happened on October the 7th, or about the state of Israel, whether it be its history or the makeup of its population.
If you look at a picture of the Supreme Court of Israel, or you look at the picture of the faculty of any hospital in Israel, you will see a mixture of leadership of Arabs and Jews.
Lawmakers looked at options like denying federal funds to universities that don't address these problems, or removing their academic accreditation. Witnesses said it would take a long legal process to do this, and that setting up investigations would be the first step. Jack Bradley, NTD News.
A rabbi says it takes people of good faith to stand against anti-Semitism and not allow America's values to deteriorate from the inside. We spoke with the managing director at the Coalition for Jewish Values about the pro-Israel march in D.C. and Catholic universities supporting Jewish students. Rabbi Yaakov Menken, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Rabbi, there's been a lot of protests in support of Palestine, but there's actually a march in D.C. today. There's tens of thousands there in support of Israel. What's the message this march is sending, not just to the world, but also the Jewish community and students in America?
I'm actually hearing estimates now that it's over 200,000 people are already there, and more are still coming. It's really an amazing show of solidarity with Israel, and honestly, it's on behalf of civilization. You look at these people; they're not actually pro-Palestine. A person who's pro-Palestine is concerned about the subjugation of women under Hamas. It's concerned with people to have the right to have alternate political opinions under Hamas. It's to be able to choose to vote for whom you wish, which is not available neither in the Palestinian Authority nor in Hamas-controlled Gaza. So these people are actually not pro-Palestine. They're simply anti-Israel. They're simply anti the Jews. And when you talk about people who are glorifying things like the rape of women, beheading of babies, these people are anti-civilization. So this is really a march for America and American civilization, as well as support for Israel and against anti-Semitism.
And expanding on that note, how important is this march to the world to send out that message?
Well, I think it's crucial. I think there's an inflection point for the United States right now. I don't think it was out in the open. It was obvious to us, and basically to anybody who looked, that groups like Students for Justice in Palestine and the Council on American Islamic Relations were actually anti-Jewish hate groups disguising themselves as human rights outfits. They're not interested in human rights at all. They're interested in destruction and lack of dialogue and glorification of murder, as we're seeing. Well, now it's out in the open. It's time for civilization to stand against that, or America will lose everything that America stands for.
And we've also seen rising anti-Semitism across campuses, especially towards Jewish students. Now, there are Catholic universities who are coming out in support of Jewish students, creating these safe havens for them. How do you read this? Almost different religions helping each other.
Well, I mean, you look at Fordham University. They were the first to deny, and they actually went to court for the right to deny a charter to a Students for Justice in Palestine charter as a student organization. because SJP is just a hate group. I think that religious people realize that when religious liberty for one is threatened, religious liberty for all is threatened. What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And Christians know. You look around the world at the places where Christians are experiencing the worst persecution, and what those places share in common is that they're already Judenrein. They're already all the Jews have been cleansed out. And that's why they're going after the Christians. Because, you know, the Jews had values first, and then they go after everybody else who stands for values. And then, of course, you have the Chinese who go after everybody who stands for values, and now they're going after the Uyghur Muslims because it's all that same hate. So it's actually very heartening to see universities standing up for the Jewish people and welcoming them in. I understand that there are certain universities that are now allowing Jewish students to transfer from places where they're experiencing hostility in the middle of the year because it's just not it's not appropriate, and people of good faith and good conscience have to stand against it.
Rabbi, you mentioned the word it's heartening. Are you hopeful, given these actions by these Catholic schools and the march today, for the Jewish community in the States?
Well, let's talk about the Jewish community and then the states, because the Jews are going to survive. That is our thing. When the Jews hold tightly to their beliefs and their faith, we do persevere through the worst of experiences. I mean, look at Nazi Germany. And today, of course, to be called a Nazi is the worst epithet. And so the second question is, this is an inflection point for the United States. This is about radical Islam. It's not about the Islamic faith in general. But the radical Islamists are the ones who are pushing for people to go and emigrate and go to places like Europe and the United States to take over and rot out those values from the inside in favor of jihad and Sharia law. And that is going to destroy the United States if the United States doesn't start to stand against it. And again, that's why it's heartening that there's an option here for America to turn a very important corner.
Rabbi Yaakov Menken, thank you so much for your time.
Again, thank you for having me.
Welcome back, and now for your sports news, we welcome NTD's Dave Martin in studio with us. Dave, lots to discuss in sports. Let's begin with the NFL. Houston, Texas rookie quarterback CJ Stroud has now led his team on back-to-back game-winning drives. Would you say he's a front runner for Rookie of the Year?
Yes, absolutely. What he's done is incredible. He leads the league in multiple passing categories, including passing yards per game, lowest interception ratio. That's unheard of for a rookie quarterback. Usually it takes quarterbacks 2 to 3 years to really hit their stride. That's if they even play at all as rookies. That's completely unlike, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers. They all rode the bench as rookies. Now that's much different from receivers and running backs. They usually hit the ground running. I would say, though, behind him, probably Bijan Robinson, Jordan Addison, I would say, are probably second and third at this point.
And now, staying with the NFL, the Buffalo Bills, one of your favorites in the AFC, lost actually again last night, and then reportedly fired their offensive coordinator today. Is that unusual for a 5-5 team?
A little bit. They really should be so much better than 5-5. They've lost so many close games this season. Of course, it's always hard to correctly assign blame and to figure out who made this decision. Was it the front office? Was it the head coach? They certainly were not going to get rid of the head coach Sean McDermott, or quarterback Josh Allen, even though he leads the league with 11 interceptions. Sometimes what happens with these moves is it actually serves as a wake-up call for the players, and they just immediately start playing better. So we'll have to see if that's what happens in this case.
And now, looking at college football, the Jim Harbaugh saga continues at Michigan. Looks like he and Michigan will take on the Big Ten to court this week to protest his 3-game suspension. Did you think it seemed excessive?
Not really, when you compare it with the 2-week suspension that was being floated earlier. Now, this is 3 games he misses, but he can still conduct practices and prepare the team throughout the week. 2 weeks was no practices, no games, no contact, no nothing. That would have been a huge detriment this time of year. Now, they won a big game last week against Penn State, a very difficult opponent. Next week, they've got Ohio State. Both teams are undefeated. This is going to have national championship implications. Now, of course, this is without actually seeing the evidence against him. Reportedly, it's pretty blatant, though.
And now, shifting gears to college basketball, a big doubleheader tonight. Michigan State versus Duke, followed by Kentucky and your favorite, Kansas.
Yeah.
Which teams do you favor?
Well, I've got I've got Michigan State in the first game, and I'm going with Kansas in the second game. I'm basically picking against the two biggest unknowns in these matchups. The first is Duke head coach John Shire. He's in his second season following Coach K. The team was preseason ranked number 2, but they already lost last week. They fell to 9th in the polls. I'm not sure what to make of him. The second unknown, I would say, is Kentucky's youth. They always have a young but very talented squad, but it takes young teams time to gel. That's why I'm going with Kansas, and they're experienced. They are number 1 for a reason.
Dave, well, always great having you with us and in person in studio.
Thank you very much.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.